Hello, everyone. How is it going? Today we have with us Damon Burton, President, SEO National. Hey, Damon, how are you?
Hey, Dawood, I appreciate the opportunity to chat. I'm doing good.
Same here, same here. Excited to have you today because we're gonna talk about some cool SEO stuff and try to get some knowledge bombs from you.
Yeah.
But before I dive in, it would be great if you could introduce yourself and your company for our viewers.
Yeah. So my name's Damon Burton. I started a company called SEO National in 2007. So been doing SEO for, what is that, 14 years now. And just my background before that was originally web design, and I've just kind of stayed in our lane of SEO. I have a team of 30 now, and I'm a father. Been married for 15 years, and I got 3 kids. Let's see what else. I wrote a book about SEO last year. It's an Amazon bestseller. I also write for Forbes, and I've worked with billion-dollar companies all the way down to, we still have a lot of our small businesses that we still have our first dozen clients from over 14 years ago with us, still from day one. So worked on a lot of cool projects, big and small, met a lot of cool people, and built a lot of good relationships.
Right, right. So you said, you started with web design and then, you moved to SEO. I mean, how did
Mhm.
that happen? Normally, a web designer or developer is a developer, right? I mean,
Yeah. I think that's been one of my unique abilities, is to have the left brain, right brain, and that's really helped owning an agency now. Because you're right. Usually, most people, if they're technical, they're technical. If they're creative, they're creative. If they're a copywriter, they're a copywriter. And so, in the beginning years, when it was when it was the first year or two, when it was just myself. Um, I think that's what interested me, is because there were so many parts to it that it would always keep me entertained and satisfied. And then as we grew, you're right. And before we hit record, we briefly talked about the importance of documenting processes. Maybe we'll talk about that later, but that's been a really important part, because you're right. Usually it's really hard to find that magical unicorn of somebody that can do it all. And so
mhm,
that's why processes are so important. So you can have the designer do the design, but also understand the bigger part of the picture that they're contributing to. And when the copywriters do their copywriting, are they just writing SEO crap, or are they writing something that will actually solve a problem and contribute to the greater the greater solution? So the way that I made the transition was, I actually had a design client that said, "What do you know about Google?"
mhm.
And I said, "I know enough that I think we can try and figure something out, but I don't know enough that I feel comfortable charging you. But I also don't want to work for free." So what I did is I worked out an arrangement where I said, "I will start for free, and
Mhm.
we'll agree upon these goals. And if we hit these goals,
Right.
then you owe me retroactively, and we start a retainer." And so we said, I think it was like a 3-month goal. We ended up hitting the goal in a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
And so I enjoyed that process and learning more about SEO. And we had really good results really quickly. And then I said, well, let's see if we can repeat this. Let's see if we can do this to another design client. And so I took it to another design client who knew the first one.
Okay.
And I said, we just accomplished this for the other guys that you know. What do you think? You want to give it a try? I mean, you have nothing to lose. I also have nothing to lose, because I'm incentivized to make this work, but you guys don't have to pay anything up front. And it ended up working out really well. And both of those two people are still clients 14, 15 years later. So that's how I got into it. And then like I said, I think why I've stayed into it, because my team, we have 30 employees, and we only stay in SEO. We do a
Okay.
lot of design because that comes with the territory of
Yeah.
SEO. You have to have the right design.
Mhm.
But I think why I stayed in SEO, because I didn't want to be the agency that says they did it all and is
Yeah.
mediocre at all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also been enjoyable to stay in this, because the nice thing about SEO is that it's both stable and always changing.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of comfort when you come into it where you know what you're doing every day. But then
Mhm.
there's also new things that come into play that keep it exciting and keep your interest over the years. So that's kind of a mixed answer, but I think that answers it.
No, no, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with you. Like when I started off, like we talked earlier, I did get into that zone where some of my partners were okay, fine. We want this service, we want that service, and I had to actually add a lot of services as well. And then,
Mm,
ultimately I realized it didn't make sense to, to do it all, right? I mean, so, again, we again stayed in where we thought we were more capable of. But absolutely, you're
yeah,
right. And, like a lot of people, like, like I think also, one reason, you have been able to succeed is because, when, I mean, I've seen like, some of the work you've done or your testimonials and, I mean, you know, people like don't look at SEO just like a service where there are a fixed set of keywords and you have to rank
yeah,
them, right?
yeah,
It's the overall process of organically, increasing all the metrics and
yep,
actually making sure the person is actually getting conversions in business, right? SEO
yeah.
has evolved so much that you can't just talk about a fixed set of keywords and getting them ranked.
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting because I just had a call with a client yesterday, a new client, and we're pretty fortunate now that we built up a reputation where usually by the time most clients reach out to us, they know what they're getting into. They know the type of results we drive. They know they kind of already have a understanding of how we operate and what to expect.
Mhm.
And so that's nice because then we can say, okay, here's how we're going to do things. We're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions up at the beginning because what we're going to do is just like you said, we want to make for me it's you do it all or nothing, right? Like it's not just a fixed list of SEO tasks. And that's why we don't do packages. Because for me, I don't want to do a package where I say, do you want price point A, B, or C? And I don't want them being forced to choose C just to try and sell them more. I also don't want them choosing A when I know that may mean that we don't drive them the proper return. And so what we do is when I look at a website, basically the way we price things out is as I go, okay, it's three things. One is what industry are they in and how competitive is it? Two is are there geographical qualifiers? So are we doing this in just a city or is this like a little bit broader and it's a state or a province, or is it national versus international? And then C is how good or bad is the website built? So does it run on something that's really user friendly and we can optimize quickly? We can optimize anything, but what might take 10 minutes on one platform may take 2 hours on another to make that update. So back to what you said, that creates a lot of different problems to solve, different combinations. And you're right. You have to tackle them for me all or nothing. So the call yesterday was with a new client who came to us because he had seen what we had done and he wanted the processes. And the group he was with before was the opposite. They were the checklist people, and it was
Right,
well, we did these 10 things, and he's okay. Well, we're not moving anywhere, so what's next? And it was basically like, well, let's do those 10 things again. And he said no. So what was interesting is he came to me and I asked him, we're about a week into the campaign, and I was asking him some follow-up questions, and he says, well, I kind of already sent you that. And I said, well, the keyword is kind of, because that's not exactly what I asked for. And I understand that this is kind of repetitive, but we are making sure we do all or nothing. We are going to audit the entire site. I know that you think you know what words you can monetize, but we're going to qualify and disqualify them and tell you if you're right or wrong. And I told him straight up, I said, I'm happy to refund your money. We're only a week into this, but if you want the guy that just does a half-assed job on this, I'm not your guy. So yeah, you're totally right. You have to understand what the long-term goals are and really become part of your client's strategy and not just provide a checklist, because that checklist may be dramatically different, may need to be dramatically different depending on what the client's product or service is and what areas they service. So yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. David, tell us a little bit more about your book. Because right before the call, also, you were
Hmm.
sending your book out to two people, to two marketers, and you are getting very good response on that. So, if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I published a book last year called Outrank, and it's a really in-depth guide on SEO. So it's 135 pages. It's a legitimate book. It's not just a short PDF or anything. So when I wrote it, I wrote it with two types of readers in mind. One was the big agencies, so they can understand who is the right type of agency to hire. So there's information in there about what types of questions to ask, what type of red flags to watch out for. But then I also wanted to service the little guys and give the little guys a fighting chance. So if they couldn't afford, because doing SEO the right way has become expensive, because there's a lot of things you do that take a lot of time, and that time intensity has a cost. And so it doesn't always financially make sense for small business owners to, the thought of SEO is a good idea, but financially they may not be able to afford it just yet, especially since it takes time. And so I wanted to be able to provide a very clear outline for the smaller guys, if they had more time than money, that they could take the same processes that we roll out for big businesses and implement themselves. Because for me, I have no problem giving away all the SEO answers, because there's a couple types of content consumers that I've determined. One is the people that can take your advice and run, and that's fine with me, because a lot of people say it's the same thing when you see the content I post online on social media. I will take a very specific question and give a very specific answer. And I do not send people to a landing page. I don't send them to a funnel. I don't send them to an opt-in list, because the type of people that can take that information and go execute it are not my clients anyway. So if I can help them, then that's great. So then the second type of content consumer is the client that says, well, I now trust Damon. He has the solutions I need. I just don't need them right now. So maybe I'll come back later, or I have a referral that I can send him now. And then the third type of content consumer is the person that needs what you offer right now. And so for me, it was, the book has been a valuable tool to help other people. It's a good networking opportunity. I have a lot of pride in it being able to help other people. Just like you mentioned, I'm mailing it to individuals actually out in India. I've sent it all over the world. I've sent it, last month I sent it to Greece, Spain, Australia, and Ireland. And so it's really cool to be able to just know that there's a little something of you out in different parts of the world. But the goal was to just help other people.
Right, right. Perfect. I mean, Damon, I know we are, like we have a fixed time frame today, but what I basically want to discuss with you is, so I have had a lot of people come to me, a lot of marketers, SEO guys come to me and ask some questions about like typical questions about, like, while they're doing SEO for large websites, enterprise websites have their own challenges, whether
Mm,
it is the organization structure or getting things approved, to some technical SEO questions as well. So
mm-hmm.
so I'll just like ask you some questions about that and get your feedback on it, so that
Yeah.
our viewers can get some insights from it. So the first one would be, like, a lot of people have this question that when you are trying to crawl large websites, I mean, it's a task in itself. So I mean, how do you do it? What tools do you use? Or like, what is the process you follow?
So I usually overlap results from different sets of data. And surprisingly, I don't use a lot of the tools that other people use. And it's not that the other tools are bad. The other tools are great. An example is like SEMrush and Ahrefs. I think those are great tools, but I don't use them. The reason why I use I use a combination of other ones, because SEMrush and Ahrefs are cloud-based, which has its advantages and disadvantages. But what I do is I use a combination of a cloud-based solution and then also a local desktop solution. And so most of the time we use a combination of AWR, I think it stands for Advanced Web Ranking, and then Link Assistant has a tool called SEO Power Suite. And so the SEO Power Suite tool is an installed software, and then AWR is cloud-based. Now, the reason why I overlap the two results is because there's every tool. I mean, there's billions of websites and pages that are out there.
Absolutely.
So no matter how good any of these are, they're still going to miss like 1 to 10% of the data that's out there. So I'd recommend overlapping the data from different sets to paint a more complete picture. Now, I also like running cloud-based and desktop-based, especially when you're running like ranking reports.
Uh-huh.
Um, and when maybe you do monthly audits or quarterly audits, just to make sure the structure still looks clean, and that the client or the website owner didn't accidentally break something. So it's nice to be able to have reoccurring scheduled reports in a cloud-based platform. So if you're doing monthly or quarterly audits, when your task management system comes up and says, hey, go check the audit, then it's
Right.
already there. So that's nice to have on a scheduled frequency. But then I also like to have a desktop-based solution, so it's on demand. So that way you can go, like, today's a perfect example. We just launched we took on a new client about 2 months ago. And then over the last 2 months, we've also been working on redesigning their site, which goes back to one of the items you talked about earlier, where I said it's all or nothing. A lot of times we don't come in and redesign a site because I don't want to come in and say, hey, pay us more money for this other thing.
Yeah.
If their website's good, then we can use it. We just clean it up. But in this case, it made more sense to clean up the website and rebuild it. And this website had, I want to say, 360 something pages. So it was a pretty large website. Now we audited the website, cleaned it up, and then we went to stage launching it. Everything was good. We launched it yesterday, goes live, and then we pull an audit. And so that's what's nice is by having desktop-based software, because if I scheduled it in a cloud-based
Absolutely.
software, it's going to take a day or two.
Yeah.
But in that situation, there's an important necessity to get that data quicker. So it depends on the need, but I like to layer it from a cloud-based solution and then also a desktop solution.
Absolutely. Also, like following up on that, like normally when you're doing SEO, let's say, of a small website, it's still easier to do like, okay, fine, you do the on page and content audit and you plan the content once, but then,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with Google changing algorithms, ranking, fluctuating every now and then, normally like it's a good activity to do the audit again every
Mm-hmm.
quarter just to ensure that, okay, fine, you are still in line with what Google is ranking for those particular pages. Maybe, you compare that with the top 10, or you just do an audit, of the website itself. Uh, but then, when you talk about large websites, like doing it every quarter, what do you suggest? Because, again, doing audits, where manual element is also required, again, is time consuming. It requires a lot of investment as well, of time and money. So, how
Mm-hmm.
do you suggest doing that of large websites? Do you follow a process where you do it every quarter or you do it 6 monthly? How do you suggest doing that?
No, I take a little bit of a different approach. So we do the quarterly audits just as a safety check. We don't do them for the potential to make potential changes. It's just to make sure everything that we did before is still there. Because what happens is when you work on these big sites, then well, it's a small site or big site, like with the small sites, you have the business owners who like to be involved with everything, which is good, but then sometimes they go in and touch things that they shouldn't. And then on the big sites, you have a lot of people that are involved, and so sometimes you don't know who's touching things. So we just run it as a safety check. Now, the reason why we don't revisit it really frequently on the structure is because, back to what we were saying earlier about all or nothing. So we spend a ton of time in the beginning going, look, we're going to make this perfect now. And so instead of going, okay, we'll check it again in a month or 3 months and then make a couple more tweaks, we just spend a ton of time in the beginning making everything perfect. Like this new design that I was just talking about that we launched yesterday. The last couple of weeks of it, the designs are the easy part. Making something look nice is the easy part. It's the structure and the proper indexing and the content. Like, that's the stuff that takes a lot of time. So you briefly mentioned the word schema. We can talk about that in a minute, but we just spend a ton of time going, okay, how do we make this perfect? Not just on the homepage, not just on the top navigation pages, but how do we make this a good user experience site-wide? How do we improve the page speeds site-wide? How can we ensure that the website is responsive and mobile-friendly site-wide? What types of schema does this website need? Is it only business schema? Or is there products? We need product schema. Are they in a specific industry? Is there a schema for that industry? And so we spend a ton of time going, look, we are going to look at every possible variation and variable that we can identify, and then what is the best way to configure that for this client in their industry. So I don't, and that kind of opens up a little bit of another discussion where you said, as Google's algorithms change, do you revisit that? Usually no. And I know that's kind of going to be surprising for a lot of people, but I talk about this in my book, where there's a chapter where I say, what is the future of SEO? And so two really easy examples of how I can communicate that I don't get paranoid about algorithm changes is because I don't get into the games. I don't get into trying to do the shortcut wins that might work now and get you penalized later. So if you think about all the ways that algorithms have changed over the years, it's always the same things. And what I mean is it's always either good user experience, good content, good
Yeah.
external credibility. There's nothing outside of that really. So like if you look at in 2016, it was okay, mobile get in, everything needs to be mobile first. What do we do? Okay, well, mobile get in is just saying have a quick loading website that has a good user experience and looks good. Weird, nothing new. And then you go into, now it's like, well, what about voice, Damon? Nothing. What about voice? You know what voice is? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not me or Dawood or anybody else recording voice drops on the other side and then Google asking for those voice recordings. What's happening is you may input the query through a voice, but the way that it returns the results is just regular SEO. It's just making it audible. What it's doing is going, okay, we received a query. What websites do we trust? Now, which ones can we access the quickest? Now, which one has the best answer? It's the same thing. It's good content and good structure and good page speed. So anything that, there might be something in 5-10 years, like a whole new technology that we can't identify now, but anything that you can think about so far and anything that's happened in the past has always just been related to the same thing. So if you don't go screwing those things up and trying to game the system and just do a good design that loads quickly and has good content, not crappy SEO content just for SEO, but actually solves the problem, then you don't have to worry about any of these algorithms changes. I've never had a client get a penalty in the 15 years that I've been doing this. And when algorithms come out, when new updates come out, I don't get worried. I'll go check, but I don't get worried. And usually what happens is there's either no change or positive change, but it's never a negative change.
Right, right. No, absolutely makes sense. Even like now when you see, the recent changes or algorithm changes, it has, a lot of them have mainly been about how quick your page is loading or, how fast your website is. Again, one point which you talked about the user experience. So it all makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Since you already talked about schema, so I think, it's the right time for me to, ask you a question about that, which I've heard from a lot of people. When you're working on big websites, I mean, how do you handle schemas? Like, what's your approach, automated or manual?
It's going to depend. So I would say systematic more than automated.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it doesn't matter if it's a big site or a small site. Anything we talk about at SEO doesn't matter if it's a big site or small site, because we're going to put in the same effort and do the same quality control checks. Like when we launch a new account, we have, we touched on the importance of documenting processes. And so when we launch a new account, we have I think it's up to 220 something, like a checklist of things that we go
Mm-hmm.
through. And we do that for every client, big or small. So when it comes to schema, it's going to depend on, we try to systematize it. And so I can give you some examples. I mean, for the listeners that aren't familiar with what schema is, it's a way that it's called structured markup. And so it's basically a way you format information, because what happens when search engines go to a website, it makes a lot of educated guesses and it says, I think this is the business, I think this is the phone number, I think this is the product. But when you do schema, it doesn't necessarily have to change how it looks, but on the back end in the source code, it tells Google, hey, guess what? You don't have to guess. I'm telling you very specifically, yes, this is the business name. Yes, this is the phone number. Yes, this is the product name, the product description, the product price. So there's a seemingly unlimited list of different types of schema. You can have business schema, local business schema, product schema, review schema, FAQ schema. There's even like attorney schema. And so what you want to do is there's some of them that you always check for. Most websites are business related. So you can usually on the home or the contact page add business schema. That you only need to do once. So that's manual. Now, if it's a product, then you systematize that. And most content management systems have that built in now. If you're using WooCommerce on WordPress, they have product schema built in. If you're using Shopify, they have product schema built in. So you don't have to do that on e-commerce based websites if you're using those platforms or similar platforms. Where we get into needing to systematize schema on a bigger scale is maybe what we've done a lot lately is clients have podcasts. So there's a podcast schema. And then what you can do with that is you can do the transcript. So like here's a good SEO strategy, right? If you have a client or if you're doing podcast yourself, then use either rev.com or descript.com, something like that. You drop in the audio file, it'll convert it to text. What the value in that is then now Google can read the text. It can make some educated guesses on the audio sounds, but now it's a lot more clear by putting it in text. So you're going to get that benefit. But then if you also put that text and wrap it in schema for transcript schema, then you're going to tell Google, hey, you don't have to just guess that this is just a wall of text. It's related to a podcast. Here's the podcast name. Here's the
Exactly.
podcast episode. Here's the podcast date. And so you're helping better communicate to search engines what the content is about. So when they need to show that content that somebody's wanting to know for that type of thing, they're going to trust your website more. So on the podcast schema, what we've been doing is we've been structuring the template. So it's dynamic. So a lot of these are in WordPress websites. So if the post is in a category that we've named podcast, then also display this schema before and after the post body. And so then that way, anytime the client has a post that's marked in that category, it'll automatically add the schema. Because what you want to do is you want to ensure, back to you talking about time, you have to balance time and quality control. So if you can figure out a way to template it and systematize it, then you can do it at scale while maintaining quality control. Because what I don't want to happen is the client to email me every 2 days and go, I have a new podcast. Can you go change it again? I have a new podcast. Can you go change it again? Or I have a new podcast. You told me how to do it and I broke it. So if you can systematize it, then you guarantee the quality control and then you guarantee the consistency too. Now it happens every single time. So depending on whether it's a podcast, we do a lot of FAQ schema. There's a lot of plugins for that you can, in that case, it's kind of automated. So it depends on the type of schema. If you're doing it at scale, figure out the best solution to guarantee the quality control.
Absolutely. Also, like this is true like for a lot of e-com websites. When you're working on an e-com website, a lot of duplicate content gets created because of filters and other parameters.
Yeah.
So, as an SEO, I mean, like what is the best strategy to handle that?
You know what drives me nuts? Shopify still has a problem with that, which is really surprising because Shopify is big. That they have the problem on their collections. So the reason why this is a problem is because when a search engine comes to your website and it sees if you have 10 products, but you have those 10 products, some of those products can be in different categories, like the same product in multiple categories. But when you have these filters or these collections, then it has the product in category 1, and then again in product category 7, and then category 9. And so then you look like you're repeating yourself. And where this became a problem is from old SEO days, because in old SEO days, people would duplicate their content because the theory was, if I say more of the same thing a lot of times, then Google will think I'm an expert. And so this was a problem way before for different reasons, but it's still a problem now. And what's interesting about Shopify is they do canonical links. And I'll talk about that, WordPress versus Shopify canonical links. But what a canonical link is it tells search engines like, hey, I understand that this page is either duplicate or shows up in other places or is very similar to another piece of content. So give all the credit to whatever URL I define here. So that way, if the product shows up in multiple categories, it basically tells search engines to ignore it in the categories and just give all the value to the main product page, which is what you want. You want all the value to go to whatever the product is or whatever the post is, not the list page that it shows up on multiple times over. So what's interesting about Shopify is on their collections, they have like the URL might be damonswebsite.com/collections/ computer supplies. And then they also have the same thing that said, instead of /collections/computer supplies, it's /collections/all products/computer supplies. It's something like that. It's something/all. And it is the same list. And I have no idea why Shopify does that. And then they don't canonicalize it either. They do really well everywhere else. They canonicalize their products, but it's just on their collections page. I don't know why I'm going off on a tangent about Shopify, but yes, it is important to make sure you don't have duplicate content and you categorize things well. Now, if you use like WordPress and WooCommerce, it does properly
Yeah.
canonicalize
Yeah.
things. So you don't have to worry about that. And I guess the one last thing that's kind of weird about canonical URLs on Shopify is it doesn't give you the opportunity to customize them. So whatever it canonicalizes, you are stuck with. It doesn't give you the opportunity to override it or add a new one or anything. So you can't really do much about Shopify. For the most part, it solves the problem, but there is one large one that's outstanding.
I think one more reason, you actually talked about Shopify so much, because I think we all SEOs who have worked with Shopify, understand that problem. And there are a lot of things where, if you or you don't have somebody who can actually do custom code on Shopify, then you do face a lot of these problems from the way it is
Yeah.
built. And now they collaborated with Google now, so
Yeah.
let's see
There's one other
let's see
thing.
how
One
that
thing
changes.
that will be interesting to see. And WooCommerce was bought by Automatic, the company that owns WordPress. I want to say 2 years ago, and
Mhm.
so it'll be really interesting to see how they grow, because right now WordPress is massive.
Yeah.
It's last time I checked, which has been a while, it was like 35, 36, 37% of every website in the whole world. And what's crazy about that is there's a huge part of that statistics that's missing e-commerce, because the main commerce plugin for WordPress is WooCommerce. And so prior to a year or two ago, before WordPress bought it, it was like a separate thing. Even though most
Yeah.
people use it, it was separate. So just like you saying Google is now involved with Shopify, I wonder what's going to happen. I'm really curious to see what WordPress does when they come out. And I have to imagine that they make WooCommerce a default feature that you can turn on,
Right.
and it's just built in. And then that's just going to give WordPress even more of a massive market share. I do want to give one other tip on Shopify. You're talking about how do you do SEO things at scale? And one of the interesting things about Shopify is um, their app market. And
Yeah.
so the reason why WordPress is so massive is because there's their plugin market, which is same as apps, is so huge as well, but so many more of them are free. Like
Right.
one example is image alts. Like if you want to put an alt tag on image on a big site at scale, that sucks because you have to go through hundreds of pages and change that tag. But WordPress has some really cool plugins that are free,
Right.
and it will add the page title as the image alt. Like you still want to go through and customize those to be more relevant, but if you got 20,000 images to do, like that's probably not your biggest priority. So sometimes you just want to automate that a little bit. But what's interesting about Shopify is I've only been able to find one plugin that can do it, and it's $1.99 a month, which drives me crazy. It makes it $2 is nothing, but having to pay for something that once it's done, it's done. In principle, that's kind of annoying. So if you are comfortable in editing the templates, what you can do is a lot of times you can identify the product page that loads the images or the category page that loads the images. And then what you can do is you don't have to know all the code. If you know enough to understand where a line starts and stops, and when a quotation opens and closes a variable, then you can usually identify when it says title, page title and things like that. And you can go dynamically add that to the template of Shopify to automatically add image alts based on page names, so you aren't missing that or aren't paying the $2 a month. So if you
Well,
can get into the Shopify templates, you can do some cool stuff. But you had a good point that you might not feel comfortable editing those files.
Right, right. That's a very cool tip on all tags. I'm sure some people will check that out. Right. Also, Damon, I know we're short on time, but last couple of questions. Do you have a thumb rule? I mean, again, I would say, since we already talked about Shopify and e-com,
Mhm.
this happens a lot in e-com. You have so many categories, and a page can go
Mhm.
to, 4, 5, 6 level as well. So, do you have a thumb rule where you say, okay, fine, how deep a page should be, like how many click levels, or
Yes and no. So yes, there's a general rule. The more layers you add, the less valuable the content becomes, because search engines will basically say the farther I have to dig, the more work I have to give means it must not be that important, which means it must not be that valuable. So the more top level you can keep content, the better. Um, when we work on like menu navigations, things like that, we try not to go past 3 levels. I'm going to have a real hard. I'm going to have a discussion with the client if they're wanting to go 4 levels deeper. Not only just because search engines are going to devalue it more, but it's not a good user experience for customers to hover over a thing and then have to click over another thing and then another thing and another thing. It just feels like a lot of work. Now, the reason why I say yes and no, so that's my yes answer. The no answer is usually when you get into an e-commerce site that has that many levels of product inventory, usually they do not own the product. Usually they are a reseller or a wholesaler or an affiliate site. And those are the types of clients that I don't usually work with. And the reason why is because if you don't own the product, then you have limited creative abilities on how you can talk about the product. So the example I always give is, if you were a sporting goods store, you don't own Nike and you don't own Adidas. And so those are big brands that are very specific about what you can say. And that's fair. That's understandable. It's their product. They have the right to determine what can and can't be said. But that limits your SEO ability, because if you're selling a Nike running shoe and there's 50,000 other websites selling Nike running shoes, if you can't say anything uniquely, you are not going to rank uniquely. So I tend to decline e-commerce retail clients that have huge inventory, because that usually means they don't own the product.
Understand. Well, Damon, last question. Any tips you would, give to people working on large websites?
I would say the take the all or nothing mentality. We have a new client. I'll give you an example. We have a new client. I won't say who they are, but they're a big tech client, and the reason why we got the account is because the last agency did the checklist. They didn't become part of the campaign. They didn't ask questions. They didn't understand what types of connection the company was trying to build with their audience. And they have huge gaps in their SEO because the company just did only the checklist last time. And there's broken links everywhere. There's missing basics, title tags and meta. Even though they don't have as much SEO value as they used to, you still freaking do them because they're there. As long as the things are there and Google says they are there, then they carry some value. And so what you have to understand about SEO is it's not this magic thing is going to get you to the top, or this magic thing. It's who can juggle 100 things, 100 little things the longest and most consistently. So for me, you have to do everything. So take your time and strategize, do a full audit, figure out every single problem, and then prioritize them. Because for me, you are the expert and you should be fixing all these problems. You should not be choosing, this problem is not that big of a deal, so I don't care. Instead, you should say, this problem is not as big of a deal, so I'll do that at step 5. But it doesn't mean you ignore it. So don't let the scale of a website overwhelm you. You should be doing everything, just prioritize it.
Absolutely. Well, Damon, thank you so much for your time. It was, lovely having you, and hopefully, we will talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to chat.